theme, theology and practice of hospitality, especially in times of conflict, confrontation, war, social upheavals, is my research focus for last probably 10 years. And I'm preparing a course that I will teach in August in Louvain that will be called Challenges of Theology and Practice of Hospitality in a Wartime. So today I'll share with you, dear friends, just some segments of my course. I prepared probably too many slides, so we'll see how far I will go, and maybe I will skip some portions of what I have prepared because I don't think it is possible to cover all the materials that I prepared. So let me start with sharing presentation. Okay, just a moment. Okay, now. Do you see presentation well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So today we will talk on a topic: hospitality as Christian value, exploring its role in welcoming and supporting migrants. Yes, and it's a part of our Ecumenical School for Dialogue. So hospitality is often called as a misunderstood virtue. It's very interesting observation. There is an excellent book, actually I have it right in front of me, called Refugee Reimagined, one of the best biblical research on role of theology of hospitality in defining church attitude toward migrants and all the people who are seeking for asylum or in need of welcome and hospitality. So in introduction, Matthew Soren's actually uses this phrase that hospitality is a misunderstood virtue. Why? Because in our ordinary language, when we talk about hospitality, we quite often mean kind of entertaining friends with some extravagant meals, or quite often hospitality is mentioned in industrial framework. So there are even degrees in hospitality, but those degrees are not about church ethic, but in hotels, restaurant business, cruises, and other such businesses. However, when Bible, theology, and philosophy talks about hospitality, it has a bit different things in view, because we have a very clear biblical mandate. In Romans 12:13, we read, practice hospitality. Paul writes to Timothy and Titus that leaders should be hospitable. And there are many other texts in Old and New Testament that quite explicitly talk about the church responsibility to practice welcoming attitude toward others, be they foreigners, strangers, or some different categories of people. So to start, I'd like to recommend you to watch a beginning when you have time after this class of old movie of Coen Brothers. It's 2008 or 9 movie called A Serious Man. I'm not sure if someone present here has seen that movie. Now, Coen Brothers are very interesting movie editors. So the beginning scene of this movie is set in pre-World II Eastern Europe, somewhere in Eastern Poland, or maybe even in the place where I am now, near Lviv in Galicia. So one Jewish man called Velvel come back home in winter, and he says to his wife that when he was returning from market, he met old person that their family knew called Reb Roshkover. And when he tells this to his wife responds to him and says, well, that couldn't be possible because Reb Roshkover have has died 3 years ago. And I know the people that can assure that he has died 3 years ago. So it is not a real person, it's Debuk in Yiddish mean ghost. And she says, God cursed us because you met the ghost, and now it will bring problems to our family, to our life. And then they hear the sound of someone knocking into their door. And when she looks at the husband, he says, well, I invited him to our house for a cup of soup. And here we have the crucial moment of hospitality. Someone is knocking into your door. You do not know, is this, as Richard Kearney, other excellent theologian says, is this monster or Messiah? You don't know. The door is closed, someone is knocking. You do not know, is this really Reb Hershkover, a very respected old Jew that somehow survived when people thought that he is dead already? Or is this really Dubuque, a ghost who potentially can bring disaster and harm to your life? So I just recommend you to watch the final scene of this meeting. I won't tell you what happens then, but here we see this inherent tension and challenge in every act of genuine hospitality. And even when we talk about migrants, it's still the same. Those people who want to come to our country, who are they? They may speak different language, they may have different religion, they look in different ways, they have different appearance. Are they threat? Are they source of danger? Or they could be a blessing to our community, to our family, to us? Who are they? Will we open our doors or will we keep it shut? And actually, this movie opening scene, A Serious Man movie, it actually presents us the challenge of opening the door, because we always have those anxieties. Stranger might bring harm, morally corrupt person or violent person. We can bring or put under risk ourselves, or even, which is even more important for us, our loved ones. Or if guest will come, maybe then he or she or they will refuse to leave. So what then? And for this reason, in ancient cultures, both Near East and Greek cultures, there was a limit of time that guests could stay in your house. And after that, it was not anymore a hospitality, that was already an act of aggression. Or maybe you might think, well, we do not have sufficient resources. Like many countries say, yeah, we do not mind accepting migrants, but actually resources of our country are very limited. Just one very simple example, it's Lebanon accepting Syrian refugees. Lebanon is not a big country with economic disaster, actually, for many years. And then after the beginning of civil war in Syria in 2011, couple millions of Syriacs came to Lebanon, and population of Lebanon is just, as far as I remember, near 4 million. So basically, almost half of the country now was migrants, and then economical and other resources of the country were exhausted. So sometimes those anxieties are justified, but do we really have to just be motivated by our anxieties? Because still, Scripture very clearly commands us to be hospitable to strangers, even if our fears persist. So let me talk very briefly about etymology, because it's important, of hospitality, or in Greek language philoxenia, or in English-speaking world, this word hospitality that comes from Latin. So Emile Benveniste, French scholar, did excellent research about the roots, linguistic roots of the term hospitality. And he claims that concept of hospitality stems from two distinct Indo-European linguistic roots. The Latin term hospes, or guest or host, combines two roots. Hosti which has the meaning of reciprocity, and pet or pot, which has the meaning of master or personal identity. And let me briefly elaborate on those two roots. So the first part of hospitality, potis, it brings with it a concept of ipseity. It signifies mastery, referring to the master of the home who dictates law and controls household members and property. And just very simple examples would be Greek words like despotes or Latin dominus. They illustrate the extension of the domestic authority into social and symbolic power. And crucially, potis also relates to personal identity or ipseity. So roots like pet, pot, or pt originally meant himself, his own, of himself, indicating self-mastery. Therefore, the master or potis is not just someone in charge, but the personification of self-identity. So it's very important for understanding hospitality. The act of offering hospitality stems from the position of being at home. If I am not at home, if I'm not a master of my country, of my house, of my city, of my church, actually, I do not have any right or power to invite someone, to welcome someone, or to receive someone. The second part of the hospitality, hostis, brings with it a principle of reciprocity. So the word hostix evokes reciprocity and equality by compensation. A hostis is someone who offers a counter gift for a gift. So this term encompasses both host and guest. This is very important. Both in philoxenia and in hospitality originally, xenos in Greek or host in Latin meant both host and guest. So all the interplay of relationships between master and stranger, between host and guest were in play here. So yes, host and guest, so they are linked by an obligation to reciprocate acts of hospitality. And the Greek word xenos similarly refers to both host and guest bound by a hospitable pact, xenia, with specific often generational obligations. If you will go and read Greek poems, Homer poems, and other Greek literature from that time, you will see how often people who meet each other in some strange lands would recognize that they have this pact of hospitality done by their parents or grandparents and still active. Or other example, it's a potlatch institution in North American First Nations tribes. It exemplifies that this compensatory reciprocal bond forming the foundation of social and religious life. And here we come to the important observation about complexity and perils of hospitality. Combining both hostis and potis in hospitality, we come to conclusions that hospitality is a union of a social, reciprocal relationship and a notion of mastery and personal identity. And this relationship is unstable. It can lead to mutual recognition in respect, what is actually expressed in xenia, whereas the guest's depth reinforces the host mastery. However, and we read about that in the Bible as well, it can also become a source of anxiety, rivalry, or hostility. The host power over the guest can be threatening, or the guest might usurp the host position. So historically, the term hostis evolved from designating a resident foreigner or guest with rights to mean enemy in Roman law, as the institution of hospitality became formalized and less ethical. So Western literature frequently portrays hospitality as a threat to sovereignty, whether of the state or the individual subject self-identity. And concluding this brief etymological research, I want to say that actually final stage of this linguistic evolution of hostis and xenos explains their modern connotation. because like I mentioned already, now hostis and xenos have this exclusive meaning. From the Roman period onward, hostis came to be applied to the enemy, no longer naming the guest. And the same shift happened also in Greek language. Greek xenos increasingly meant stranger. So we have now the word xenophobia, the fear of strangers. Now let's go to theological definitions of hospitality. There are plenty of them. I will mention some of them, but basically it's a huge literature exploring the issue of theological aspects of hospitality. One of the best contemporary scholars, Christine de Paul, and she passed away as far as I remember last year. She's the best, at least Protestant scholar of theology and practice of hospitality. Her research emphasized the role of hospitality in Christian community, first of all, as a way of life. So she focused her research and her many years work in publishing and teaching to recover and explore Christian hospitality as a theology of welcome. And she says, she gives this definition. So the hospitality is the practice of God's welcome by reaching across differences, bringing justice and healing to our world in crisis. And as Christine de Paul emphasized, hospitality encompasses all areas of life, physical, social, and spiritual. It reflects God's character and our participation in God's mission. And as Christine de Paul observed, the generous welcome to the least without concern for host advantage reflects God's hospitality to the undeserving in his acts of grace. Other excellent researcher, Thomas Reynolds, that I had the privilege to know in person, he has written extensively on theology of hospitality in the context of church care for disabled people with disabilities. Excellent research. So he talks a lot about how important it is to cultivate or foster vulnerable Christian communities rooted in divine love. So basically, he uses the hospitality to reframe Christian attitude toward disability, and he encourages different thinking and acting towards people with disabilities. His goal is nurturing communities of abundant hospitality, communities that actively welcome and befriend the strangers, quite often persons with disabilities, as inherently valuable. And this aspect of his work is very important as well for Ukraine, where we have so many disabled people because of war. Amy Oden, another excellent researcher, there is somewhere her book here in my bookshelf as well. She writes about hospitality as an act of welcoming the stranger that has different dimensions. And we can see it in the Bible as well. So at least 3 dimensions. First of all, it's meeting human physical need. As you read all the stories of acts of hospitality in the Bible, you see that first of all, they have to respond to basic or physical needs of person, like food, shelter, food washing, in contemporary context, medical care, clothing, travel provisions, and actually table fellowship is a symbol of this sharing of life. Also, it involves social needs, recasting social relations, including outsiders, sponsoring, mentoring, and spiritual needs. It's prayer, acknowledging dependence on God, gratitude, integration into worship community. And core idea is that hospitality is a way of life that values otherness. We are quite often afraid of otherness when we meet or see or read about someone who is very different than we. We have this fear, this anxiety. We can see potential harm, but hospitable attitude values otherness and practice attentive listening, honoring the stranger. Arthur Sutherland writes that hospitality is fundamental to Christian identity. It's not just a virtue, one virtue among other virtues. It's basically fundamental to understanding God in his creation, in redemption, to understanding ourselves, and to understanding the world around us. So key distinctions of biblical or Christian hospitality, according to Sutherland, it is not a merely entertaining or having friends for dinner. It challenges cultural view of it solely as a woman's duty, as it quite often happen in our context. It's responsibility, not reciprocity. It differentiates from civility and honor, early Christian hospitality as profession of faith. Okay. And I also, there was one more book that I wanted to mention today is written by Jamie Reeves. I wanted to show you this book. It's about protective hospitality. Reeves' contribution consists that she insists in extending beyond table fellowship into inclusion to provision of refugee or sanctuary to an endangered others. And actually that relates hospitality to the general theme of the school. And she gives this definition of protective hospitality after actually working many years in Balkan context and having personal experience with people seeking refuge after the ethnic cleansing and civil conflicts in former Yugoslavia. So she says that actually protective hospitality is provision of welcome and sanctuary to the threatened other in various contexts, often at great risk to oneself. And the last one that I will mention would be a Catholic but quite radical theologian, Leonardo Boff, who also has written extensively on theology and hospitality. And he insists that the key aspect in hospitable attitude toward others is collective dignity and respect. There is his big work, Virtues, where he talks about 5 core virtues for a global ethical framework. And foundational virtue, the first one that he studies, is hospitality. And he insists on its universal right and duty and sees hospitality as unconditional practice. The other are co-living, respect, tolerance, and communality. And his central thesis is that these virtues are practical foundations for human behavior to transform practices for humanity and earth. And the content of hospitality is expressed this way, that creation of an atmosphere of collective dignity and respect, and by the implementation of the kingdom of human rights and of the rights of nature. So just to recap the big range of definition, I'd like to say that hospitality is more than entertaining. It's really philoxenia, loving strangers. It involves inherent tension and risk. Every time, always, when we practice genuine hospitality, there is some risk and danger in it. It is rooted in ancient practices, both Near Eastern and Greek and Roman practices, and is deeply biblical. Key aspect of hospitality consists in transforming stranger who could be potential enemy into guest and then into friend. So basically, this is a drive of hospitality, to receive stranger that way that he will become first guest and maybe then later a friend, a part of community, not just for a short time, but for a longer period of time. Hospitality has physical, social, and spiritual dimension. It reflects God's character and mission. It is a moral framework for engaging with otherness, and it's essential for fostering collective dignity and shared human existence. So what is the biblical view of hospitality? certainly I am very selective here because the material is just endless, almost endless. Let me briefly elaborate on this. So Bible tells us that there were different categories of strangers in Old Testament people of God in Israel. So that important to say is that definition of foreigner in Bible was nuanced. And the definition of foreigner in that time is different from our definition, because we are seeing foreigners in terms of statehood and nationality. But in biblical times, it was about your kinship, you belonging to tribe, to family, to some community, even if your ethnic identity is different. The most famous biblical term for foreigner is ger, or plural gerim, stranger and guest, or as quite often we might hear this term, resident alien. So who are those people? They are strangers without blood kin ties to local community, but granted certain rights and social participation. Basically, that word means person or group who left their home for political, economic, and other reasons to reside in a foreign country. So those people were protected by Old Testament law. They were not full citizens, but they were integrated and possessed certain very clear political and religious status, rights, and protection. And it's important to notice that we will see it in the end every time when God was talking to Israelites that they shouldn't do any harm to Kerim, to resident alliance. God was reminding them that there were days when they were in Egypt and they were also Gerim. They were those strangers in Egypt land. So when Bible talks about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other Israelites, when they were living in Egypt or they didn't have their land at that time, Bible calls them Gerim as well, as Jacob and his descendants in Egypt. So we can see from many, many biblical texts, there are dozens of biblical texts meaning Ger or Gerim. Often those people were on the fringes of society. From one side, they were mentioned many times in the Bible with Levites, slaves, servants, orphans, and widows as endangered categories of people, because those would be the one who do not have means for existence, who wouldn't own land and belong to some certain tribe. Sometimes they are listed even after livestock. They lived within city gates where the poor and needy concentrated. Quite often, they were subjected to oppression and injustice. And this is the reason why Bible so many times warned Israelites not to do so to them. But the fact that Bible contains so many commandments and God calls so many times Israelites not to do harm to those people, it already tells us that there was problem there. Sometimes they were viewed as potential propagators of pagan ideas. They had the right to come and to freely go, but could not legally invite strangers. And very interesting story of Lot who invites angel in Sodom in his house. This is very clear example because Lot himself was resident alien in Sodom, and he didn't have legal rights to provide acts of hospitality because he himself was accepted to community but didn't have full rights of citizenship. And there were very clear ethical legal frameworks for the Ger. Hostility towards them was rejected in the Bible. Bible tells many times that God cares for them. They shouldn't be exploited or oppressed. And you could see many biblical texts here. God loves them equally. Also, they have some religious duties to give tithes for Levite. They were forbidden to withhold wages from a stranger, forbidden to ignore mercy laws towards strangers, and failure to observe these laws was a grave sin. The second category of strangers after gers, or gerim, is nokri. This is a strange and potentially dangerous foreigner. It relates to the otherness, sometimes something different, and has very clear negative connotations. So something to be excluded, avoided, and almost all the biblical examples of using this word, they have this negative connotation. It signifies denial, rejection. So those people who didn't have even the rights of resident alien, they were not permitted to participate in Passover. Israelites should not purchase sacrificial animals from them, so there was a religious separation. And especially after exile, when this new community was developed in Jerusalem and Judah, the new very hostile relations to Nokri began to dominate in Judaism. So let's come to some conclusion about Old Testament hospitality paradigm. As I said, it was deeply rooted in ancient Near Eastern practices, driven by both necessity and sacred duty. It has very clear theological foundation, God's triune hospitality and his act of creation as an invitation. Israel identity as aliens and sojourners forms the basis for their ethical treatment of others. There was distinction between different types of strangers, highlighting different levels of integration, rights, and perceived threat, and strong emphasis on care for the vulnerable, ger, widow, and orphans that reflects God's character. Okay, I will not talk about all those examples. I just briefly mention that the most famous story of Old Testament hospitality is story of Abraham and him meeting three strangers. It's a paradigm story for all the hospitality, not just in Christianity, but in Judaism and Islam as well. How Abraham received those strangers that he never met before, and he provides all the care and respect and meets their needs, and God rewards him for this. And kind of like a continuation of the story shows that hospitality could be very dangerous. It's Lot and the man in Sodom. We know about this biblical event as well. So just to conclude about Old Testament, we see some weaknesses of Old Testament hospitality. It is very limited. It was restricted to travelers or to resident aliens. It was primarily a patriarchal practice. It was limited in its goals. And when we talk about contemporary Christian hospitality, we understand that we need much more dynamic and creative response. So Old Testament practice of hospitality contributes significantly to a Christian paradigm, but it is not sufficient alone. It must be broadened and deepened. And also very briefly about New Testament hospitality. Basically, it largely continued Greco-Roman and Jewish practices adapted to specific consent. And we might see many biblical texts that contain very clear moral imperative to be hospitable. Apostle Paul urges hospitality. We read about that in Hebrews and in Peter letters. And also, as we read in Matthew 25, hospitality to Christian then strangers is a non-negotiable requirement, equating response to disciples with response to Christ. In New Testament, we might read about many stories when Jesus was both guest and host. And quite often, this great reversal happened when Jesus first was invited as guest, but then he became a host, like in the stories of Mary and Martha, in the story of Zacchaeus, and the most famous story, Jesus meeting disciples on the road to Emmaus. So he first to come to them as a stranger, they invite him to home as a guest, but finally he breaks a bread as a host. It's very interesting transformations that happened every time in hospitality. Okay, our time is running, so I give a couple examples of contemporary or recent practice of hospitality, and then the rest of the time I'll try to talk about specifically hospitality in the context of migration issues. Basically, after ancient time and the Middle Ages, when we come to modern era, starting from Reformation, so 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, theological depths and virtue of hospitality, especially in Protestant world, actually ceased to exist because of development of social state services, hospitals, care centers, and other provisions that government were providing to citizens. There was less and less need of Christian and churches practicing hospitality as in ancient or medieval times. But in 20th century, we see kind of a resurgence, recovery of practice of hospitality as deeply Christian virtue and value. And the first examples come from 19th century. I just will give some names as a case study, and if you would like, you can do some research yourselves. First of all, I might mention the Underground Railroad. Yes, it's very famous network of safe houses and conductors who assisted enslaved persons in North America to escape from southern states to the states where they can be free. It also drew upon very clear biblical mandate to welcome strangers and protect vulnerable people. It served as a form of resistance against unjust systems. So quite often hospitality can be countercultural and has a transformative power in it. So Christian communities organized network of care, and by that they showed us how welcome can finally even transform social systems. When we talk about Underground Railroad and its contemporary relevance, we should mention the practice of sanctuary cities or congregations protecting undocumented immigrants, like in recent years. It also reminds us about faith-based refugee resettlement programs, about Christian responses to human trafficking. One of my good friends from Moldova, Igor Ubivol, many years is working with victims of human trafficking from Moldova in Ukraine and especially sexual slavery in European countries. So basically, church is still doing this ministry in many countries. But also it raises very difficult theological questions. When does Christian hospitality require breaking unjust laws? Yes, so what do we do then if it puts us under the risk of being criminally persecuted? How do faith communities balance institutional stability with prophetic witness? So quite often we think about preserving our church or union or organization, and we are afraid of putting it under the risk for the sake of prophetic witness. What does it mean to welcome strangers when such welcome challenges fundamental social structures? Those are very important questions. The second case study that I also want to briefly mention relates to Second World War and to the ministry of Reformed community in French village Les Chambon-sur-Lignon. You might heard about the work of Pastor André and Magda Trocme. Between 1940 and 44, in a mountainous region in south-central France, a community of Reformed believers that existed there for hundreds of years quietly resisted the Vichy government and German occupation. This village, which is now the whole village, and the pastor have the status of righteous of the world, saved at least 3, and some other estimations give us 5,000 of Jews, providing them sanctuary. And leaders of this community, they were Protestant pastors André and Magda Trocme and Eduard Theys. They provided sanctuary for Jewish escaping from Gestapo and from Vichy gendarmes, and provided them sanctuary in their homes, farms, and public buildings, and facilitated their escape to safer locations like nearby Switzerland. So inhabitants practiced hospitality, putting themselves at risk. And it's interesting that many years after the Second World War, maybe like at least 20 years, there was not much talk about their work of saving Jews. Actually, only in 1960s and 70s, first publications came. So why was that so? Because villagers, including pastors, they never regarded their actions as some extraordinary heroism. So when Pastor Trocme was asked by French pro-Hitler government if there are some Jews in his community, there was his very famous response: "Those people came to ask for help and shelter. I'm their shepherd, and the shepherd does not leave his flock. I do not know what a Jew means. I only know what a human being means." It's very interesting observation. And the third, and maybe even more important case study, and here my Catholic friends would give much more, could give much more information than me, is Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker Movement, founded in United States of America in 1930s, and still exist in providing shelters, hospitality houses, and all kinds of social help for people in danger. And the last case study that I would like to mention is American Sanctuary Movement, which also relates quite close to our current situation. As you know, in 1980s, Sanctuary Movement, and now there is another wave of American Sanctuary Movement, appeared in United States of America as a response to humanitarian crisis from civil conflicts in Central America. So refugees from such countries as El Salvador, Guatemala, and others were fleeing violence and political persecution to the United States of America. But because the American government was supporting the regimes in those countries, they were often denied in asylum. And then in early 80s, churches and other faith communities sheltered thousands of refugees, defined federal immigration laws. They declared churches, synagogues, Christian organizations as sanctuaries and provided refuge to those people, simultaneously advocating for policy changes, and that prompted congregational action by the 90s to support asylees. And Sanctuary Movement was also based on theology and ethics of hospitality as a moral obligation to welcome the stranger and care for marginalized. So, contemporary challenges. As Roman said, you already had some lectures about the importance of migration challenges for contemporary world, and I just maybe repeat some couple ideas. Yes, migration today is a global phenomenon, and there are very diverse, different drivers of migrations. Many people have to leave their country because of war and persecution, like Syria, Ukraine, and other countries, civil unrest and political oppression. The whole new reason for leaving your country is climate change, like many people live in Indonesia because environmental degradation and natural disasters, or quite often resources scarcity, economic disparity. People are looking for better opportunities for their lives and their families, and also humanitarian crisis. It's forced displacement, lack of basic services, and famine. And migration provides a complex challenge for churches and a lot of complexities. Legal complexities. Quite often churches have hard time navigating national immigration laws, asylum processes, and international conventions. Also xenophobia and societal integration challenges. Churches quite often have to combat prejudice, fostering social cohesion in host communities. Resource limitations. It's quite different to balance the immense need with the finite church resources. And theological questions, grappling with justice, national sovereignty, and the church's responsibility beyond its borders. One of the hugest challenges that all churches are facing in relation to migrant challenges is dramatic power and damaging power of anti-immigrant rhetoric. It's a negative language. Quite often public discourse frames migrants as commodities, animals, criminals, pollutants, and invaders, contributing to fear and xenophobia. It has a devastating impact on communities. This rhetoric infiltrates parishes, poisoning relationships, and tempting communities to accept these negative constructions as factual, overriding core Christian beliefs. And in consequence, it leads to militarization of borders, unremarked death, and a societal disregard for the human dignity of migrants. So, church has to pay much more attention to its mission in action today, supporting migrants in its challenging situations. As I said, we have very clear biblical mandate for this modern practice, recognizing the image of God in every migrant, regardless of status or origin. We have a biblical mandate to embody Christ's welcome to the stranger in a very concrete ways. And there are different forms of support the church can provide to migrants. It's direct aid, providing immediate food, shelter, clothing, and essential medical assistance. It's integration support, offering language classes, vocational training, legal aid, psychological support for trauma, and assistance with navigating new governmental systems. It's advocacy, speaking out against unjust policies, promoting human treatment, and fostering inclusive societies at local, national, and international levels. And also, very important, spiritual and pastoral care, offering spiritual solace, building new communities, and providing accompaniment through the journey of displacement and resettlement. And here, my last 5 minutes before Q&A session, I'll give a couple case studies as well. Well, let's mention refugees who were escaping from Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1990s after or in the context of ethnic cleansing and conflict during the Balkan, or more narrowly speaking, Bosnian War. There was a mass displacement of Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs, creating a significant refugee crisis. And the church response was massive. It was direct resettlement and sponsorship. Many churches played a significant role in sponsoring and welcoming refugees into their communities. It's community integration. Churches were providing housing, language support, and social networks to help families to adjust to new countries and new cultures. Trauma support, pastoral care, and psychological support for those who experience a severe trauma. I come to Balkans quite often, and even 30 years after the Balkan War, just after a couple minutes of talk with someone who experienced that, you will see the tears on their eyes, and still all the memories and traumas are there after all those years. Just preparing to this lecture, I had a Zoom with my colleague from Sarajevo, Protestant pastor, and he said that all the kind of project that meant to bring healing, they were very not effective, and still society is very divided, full of anger and hatred. Second case study, it's refugees from Syria. As you know, protracted civil war in Syria led to one of the largest refugee crises. Millions displaced to neighboring countries, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Europe. And again, there was a church response with humanitarian aid, refugee sponsorship programs, advocacy for safe passage, and local congregational welcome. And the last one, and the most important for us in Ukraine, it's situation with refugees fleeing from the war from our country since February 2022. And again, we see and we have experienced a lot of hospitality from Christian communities. The first was frontline hospitality. So churches in Poland, Romania, Moldova, Hungary, and Slovakia became immediate reception centers. As soon as you would cross border to Poland or to Romania, you would have hundreds and thousands of people, many of them were Christians, providing all possible help, food, shelter, transport, and everything you need for millions crossing borders. It is global solidarity. Churches worldwide mobilized resources, huge resources, for humanitarian aid and direct support, often in partnership with ecumenical and international bodies. Faith communities participated in government-based initiatives for hosting refugees in private homes. It's also pastoral care. There are many programs launched by international Christian organizations addressing trauma issues, providing spiritual comfort, and helping maintain cultural and religious ties for displaced Ukrainians. And ecumenical collaboration. Unprecedented levels of cooperation between Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant and other faith groups in responding to the crisis. So I just would like to leave us with this very famous biblical text from Leviticus 19, chapter, verses 33 and 34. So God said to Israel, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." So we read here how to treat foreigners. And this teaching to treat foreigners in the best possible way, it stems from the experience of the Israelites as foreigners in Egypt, which instilled in them an understanding of what it means to be foreigner. This concept of hospitality is situated within the context of holiness. It's very important. God actually tells to Israel that one of the things, what it means to be a holy person, living godly life, is to love foreigners. It is an integral part of living a holy life. Also, this principle of equality before the law is affirmed, rejecting any discrimination against those who are not part of the native society. And love and hospitality toward foreigners reflect God's character, encouraging the people of Israel to be a witness to God's love that they received and apply it in their social relationships. And also, there are some practical implications in this text that we read. The principle of loving foreigners fosters a welcoming attitude in society, laying the groundwork for fair immigration policies and providing services for refugees. Societies that follow this principle can develop more inclusive social policies, ensuring that the rights and needs of foreigners are respected and met. Well, this practical implication includes also considering how social policies can reflect the values of hospitality toward foreigners, as well as strengthening solidarity and communal life in diverse societies. Societies can build strong moral and social foundations, creating an environment where love, justice, and solidarity can flourish. So, hospitality is a witness to the kingdom of God. It has enduring value. Christian hospitality is a dynamic, adaptive, and fundamental theological mandate. Its essence remains the radical welcome of Christ in the person of the migrant and refugee. In a world facing unprecedented migration, the church is called to be a prophetic and practical agent of welcome, justice, and solidarity. And we should remember that embodying hospitality for migrants is a witness to the kingdom of God, a vision of a new world where all are welcomed, belong, and flourish. Every act of kindness to a stranger can be a sacred encounter with God's presence. So this is not just a social program, it is integral to the church's very identity and mission in new circumstances to manifest the welcome and love of God. Thank you.